Thank you so much for having me here today. It really is a great honor to be here, especially at this time when there are so many cycles converging. I think one of the remarkable things is that the public has become aware of cycles. The world may not have ended physically, but a new world is coming into being, which so many of you are helping create, and that is something so wonderful. So perhaps the Mayans were right. As you know, the story they tell is on that Mayan calendar, which is circular. The Mayans were very great about circular things. Uh, it goes up to a certain date, and that's simply because they ran out of space. There was supposedly a smaller rock that continued on, but that has rolled away, so we don't know that part. But as I say, it's so great to be with like-minded souls and to be made to feel so welcome, especially at this time and at the end of this particular 7-year cycle and the beginning of another, which is so important for our planet. As you know, both Madame Blavatsky and Alice Bailey refer to the impact of cycles and human destiny. This is one of the keynotes of their work, this idea of cycles. And just let me stop here as an aside to say and pay tribute to these two remarkable women. You know, at a time when Blavatsky started her public work in 1875, it was a totally different world for women. An unchaperoned woman couldn't book into a hotel. Employment opportunities were next to none. You could be a teacher. Thank God the telephone came along. You could become a telephone operator or a seamstress. But the idea of women owning property, of having any equal rights was way, way in the distance. And it's interesting that Alice Bailey's work starts coming to the fore when women start being recognized and getting the vote. So in something like the Theosophical Society, you see a chance for women to really play a role. They could be elected before women could be elected to anything. They could play a dominant part. It's remarkable to think that Helena Petrovna Blavatsky left home at the age of 18 and began her world travels. As you may know, that she came from a fairly well-off, well-educated aristocratic family in southern Russia. She could have had a very well-off life. Family visited St. Petersburg. Her grandmother was a princess, which carried a lot of weight in those days. But she left all of this and began this life of travel. And as you know, meeting her own teacher in London when she was 20 years old. And she says that she actually did get to Tibet and study with them. And it's interesting, when she makes these statements in the 1880s, Tibet would be the last place in anyone's consciousness. India would be the last place in anyone's consciousness. India was the place you sent missionaries and doctors. The idea of going there for spirituality was just absurd. One of the 19th century preachers who had visited India said that if there is any light in Asia, it is a twilight. The great English educator Macaulay, when they were debating of what type of education to give to Indians, said one single shelf of British literature is worth all the literature of India. Right? So it shows you how things have changed. But this idea of them making this interconnection and then starting this movement in New York, we were just discussing before, at the time the Theosophical Society was started, New York was not a great world center as it is today. It was London, it was Paris, it was Berlin that were the major centers. Why you would start it in America to begin with would be quite remarkable. But they saw something, they had a vision, these great teachers who stand behind all of these movements. And because of her studies, she gave the world this wonderful meditative text in The Secret Doctrine. This is an abridgment I did for Penguin. And I must tell you, recently I did a lecture tour in Australia, and in some of the smallest towns, Penguin has a tremendous worldwide distribution. It's not an easy thing to cut out 1,000 pages of any author's work. And I kept thinking what the old lady might have said as she stopped from rolling cigarettes. But you know that when she wrote her first book, Isis Unveiled, she supposedly visited a family, the Corsons in Ithaca, and they begged her, you know, when they drove out in public, they wanted her to see Lake Cayuga and the plots around Cornell, but begged her not to smoke in public. And the Professor Corson's wife wrote to her son, she said, but the poor woman could not contain herself, and the carriage had to stop when she sat on a log and puffed away. Now, smoking, of course, for a woman at that time was actually quite shocking, but supposedly Russian women did smoke. It's amazing for someone who smoked so much and she didn't die of any lung disease or anything like that. But with the Secret Doctrine, as you know, it's all based around these stanzas, which are quite remarkable. Next year will be the 125th anniversary of the publication of the Secret Doctrine. There will be a conference here in August, which will bring together many different groups, and the theme will be the Secret Doctrine and Madame Blavatsky and her contribution. I think it will be the week of August 12th in New York. For over a century, people have studied this book, as many of our great texts, as things we study. We read, we ponder, but there are other aspects to these great books. And as she herself says, that esoteric texts can be approached on 3 different levels. There is the literal approach, so that when we read about these great cosmologies and teachings, they are actually describing an actual event or thing. There is a symbolic or allegorical approach, so that it actually means something else on an inner level. And then there is the transformative approach, that simply integrating with the text, reading the book, has a transformative effect on an inner level. We are all so based in this material world that we are apt to become despondent because change does not occur as much as we want. Someone has put out a poster with Darwin saying, gradual change we can all believe in. You know, Darwin was very slow and gradual change. But these changes also occur on so many levels, on inner levels. These great women, Blavatsky, Bailey, so many others, have really told us and taught us that these changes are affecting us on inner levels, and all we really have to do is to become more aware, to become more sensitive. Blavatsky also gave the world this little text, The Voice of the Silence, which she herself says it's what students in the school she belonged to studied. And this is an edition that was published in Peking in 1927 with actually a foreword by the Panchen Lama, who you know is only second to the Dalai Lama, who actually wrote a little foreword to it. Look at the case of Alice Bailey. Here was somebody who had no background in literature and writing books, yet was able to turn out 20 major books that are all still in print and are all still affecting people, that have become a ground and base for so much of the esoteric tradition in our time. You know, one of the great revelations of our time is that academics have suddenly discovered that such a thing as esotericism exists. They are now, of course, writing about it, that there's both Alice Bailey and Blavatsky talk about these cycles that have been occurring, both since the time of the Renaissance. And every generation there is a further input of teaching, a further input of teaching. If you look during the Renaissance, something quite remarkable happened. There was a great fusion. They discovered Hermetic text. They discovered Kabbalah. They discovered a whole range of material. But of course, that was just left for a certain elite. You, of course, had to read Latin. You had to be well off enough to be able to study these things, to afford manuscripts. The printing press, just like the internet in our time, made all of this available to literally everyone. You see the same thing with Paracelsus in the 16th century, the Rosicrucian movement in the 17th century, the Freemason movement in the 18th century. All of these movements went one step further. In Freemasonry, it was a remarkable thing. In the Masonic Lodge, regardless of your status, you could be a servant, you could be a lord, you could be even a Christian. You were all had égalité, fraternité, you were all on an equal level. But of course, as great as that movement was, they left out one group of people, women. Women were not allowed to be Freemasons, even till this day. In masculine masonry, as it's called, women are not allowed to play a part. And of course, you see with the Theosophists in the 19th century who suddenly brought this whole idea of India as a source of great wealth and light to the West. In my collection of books, I have a little copy of the Bhagavad Gita, which was autographed to someone, and it was what was then Indian territory. Imagine, these states hadn't even been formed, and someone was giving someone a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. It's amazing to think of these great frontier women who would be plowing the fields all day and then studying the Bhagavad Gita by candle or kerosene light. It's quite remarkable. So the work of a pioneer is never an easy one, but it requires a tremendous amount of commitment and belief. And also this stick-to-itness. There are many times in both Blavatsky's life and Bailey's life where they could have given this up for a much more comfortable life. Mrs. Bailey, as you know, started working in a theosophical center on the West Coast, and having lived and worked in theosophical centers, I must tell you it must not have been an easy thing for her, especially when you are at the bottom of the totem pole. She started out simply emptying garbage in the cafeteria. But she had a mission, she had a calling, this wonderful interconnectedness that she believed so passionately for. When she started writing, there was no organization or means to keep these books in print. But she kept writing and receiving this material. Some of it published after her death, as you know. So we must not just rest on exterior signs and symbols, because, as I say, this work continues on so many inner levels. I find so many students tend to get despondent because we judge it, for instance, on numbers. The present president of the Theosophical Society told me that she had started a little magazine in India. It was not so much a theosophical or esoteric magazine, but one about social conditions. And of course, it didn't get the reception she imagined. And she had mentioned this to Krishnamurti. And he said to her, is it just a question of numbers, or is the thing worth doing? If we judge ourselves just by the exterior world, we will always be disappointed. That we fill a football stadium with members or people, there's always something larger. We will always be going on and on, trying to emulate the exterior world when we should be so happy with what we have. I just want to tell you a side story that I always like to tell. You know the story about the fisherman and his wife? If you don't, I'll tell it to you. It's a story about a poor fisherman who lives by the ocean, and every day he goes and gets his daily catch that's subsistent enough for him. And one day he catches a mermaid in his net. And the mermaid says, if you set me free, I will give you 3 wishes. And he says, I have everything I want. And he throws her back. And he goes home and he tells his wife this story, and she becomes enraged. She said, look at the way we're living. We have nothing, and you have a chance to get something. She said, who is the greatest person in the country? He says, well, the king is the greatest person. So she sends this poor man back out. He fishes again, of course, catches the mermaid. The mermaid says, I'll give you any wish you want if you set me free. She says, well, my wife wants to be king. And the waves churn, and the thunder rages, and he goes back home, and his house, his little hut, has been transformed into this great palace. And there is his wife sitting on the throne with courtiers, and of course she's tremendously happy about this. And after a while she says, no one is greater than the king. And then one of her courtiers says, but the Pope is greater than the king. And then she sees the Pope with his retinue passing by. So of course she sends this poor man again out to see if he'll catch this mermaid, and of course he does. Now, she must be a very silly mermaid if she's being caught, but the writers of this story don't deal with that part. It's supposed to be an allegory. So, of course, he catches the mermaid again. She says, I'll give you any wish that you want. And he says, my wife wants to be Pope. Right? So the waves churn, the thunder and lightning flash, and he goes back home. And his home has now been transformed into this giant basilica, and there is his wife sitting in a throne, surrounded by archbishops, and they're all sensing incense to her. And she says, no one is greater than the Pope. And one of them says, God is greater than the Pope. Well, you can imagine what this is going to lead to. So she sends this poor, long-suffering husband of hers out to tell the mermaid that she wants to be God, right? And of course, the mermaid gets caught, says she'll give him any wish. He said, my wife wants to be God. This time the ocean really churns, the waters boil. And he goes back home, and it's the same little hut that he had in the beginning, right? So it was all there. And, we have so much to be thankful for. Those of us who are living in these urban areas like Geneva, like London, like New York, are so fortunate. The great Tibetan teacher Tsongkhapa, who started the Gelugpa school that the Dalai Lama is head of, said, one of the signs that you know you're on the spiritual path is you have leisure and opportunity. Your karma has brought you to this point where you have the time to be able to study these things, to focus on these things. If your whole world is geared around simply just trying to carry water for a mile or a subsistent living, believe me, you're not so concerned about the metaphysical. But your karma has brought you to this particular point. So we are now in a point, as has been said, that a new cycle is starting, one is finishing, and as you know with cycles they overlap. It's not like night and day. There is this gradual overlapping like a beautiful symphony. And as the Tibetan has pointed out, the material given through Madame Blavatsky and Alice Bailey is not finished. There is still more to come. And part of the work of a group of servers is to help pave the way for this, to help build that bridge for the dawning of a new day. So you are all workers in the field of a new way of evolutionary consciousness. And I would like to just close with a letter from one of the masters during Blavatsky's time. When a teacher gives material, it is not necessarily their own, but they find something that they think people really could use. And I thought this is so appropriate for this meeting and at this time. And it's really quite wonderful when you think of it. And he says that ideas rule the world. I think this is so important. Ideas rule the world. And as men's minds receive new ideas, laying aside the old and effete, the world will advance. Mighty revolutions will spring from them. Creeds and even powers will crumble before their onward march, crushed by the irresistible force. It will be just as impossible to resist their influence when the time comes as to stay the progress of the tide. But all this will come gradually. And before it comes, we have a duty set before us, that of sweeping away much as possible of the dross left before us by our pious forefathers. New ideas have to be planted on clean places. These ideas touch upon the most momentous subjects. So when we meet in groups like this, especially at this time, as you know, Blavatsky says, this particular time, especially around the new year, your ideas have a greater potency. When we meet as a group work is so important, and Alice Bailey and the Tibetans saw this. They didn't set up another society, but they did set up the importance of group work. When we meet like-minded together, focus and channel our energies, we are aiding those great teachers who stand behind all of these movements and have the welfare of humanity in their hearts and souls. So with those words, I just want to thank you so much for having me here. Just to end with, as Blavatsky says, the masters look at the future, not the present, and every mistake is so much more accumulated wisdom for days to come. So thank you so much for having me, and I don't need to tell you to keep on with the great work you're doing, which is so needed during this particular time. The darkest days, but as you know, there's always that golden dawn ahead for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Yes, okay. Thank you, Michael, particularly for pointing out that leadership, and especially the new group of world servers, the leadership comes through those new ideas and highlighting for us, of course, the importance of meditation. Now, I'm sure that you've all got some questions or points you want to discuss with Michael. So now's your opportunity. We have some time set aside for this.
You know, when I was a student at Columbia University, one of my professors who taught in India told me that when he would give his lectures and then he would ask the students any questions, there would be dead silence. And he mentioned this to the vice chancellor, you know, because this kept repeating and repeating. The vice chancellor turned to him and he said, if they're good students, they shouldn't have to ask questions. So I suppose this is, the allegory is somewhat similar here. You are all so good.
Michael, I have a question. This is Frankie. How are you today? And thank you for your comments and your lecture. My question has to do with leisure and opportunity. I hang out with a group where there are a lot of very successful people, and when I went to the first international group, I was amazed at the intelligence in the room, you know, attorneys and architects and so on and on. And the question has been in my mind that was related to your comment about leisure and opportunity. What, in your understanding of that, creates this path karmically?
You know, the study of karma is such a remarkable thing. It is one of the greatest things that they have given us. In 19th century, there was no idea of karma. You were born out of original sin, as you well know. You don't hear a lot about original sin anymore. It seems to have gone by the wayside. But you were all born in sin through, of course, our first parents, Adam and Eve. Your only chance, and it was a chance not for the many, but for the few, is that, of course, if you simply went to church, prayed, gave, you might have salvation. Those of you, I'm not sure if any of you have seen this film called Cold Comfort Farm, where it's a great English novel from the 20s, beautiful novel if you've ever read it. And they have a preacher in it, and he is talking to his particular group, and he's telling them, you know, that about the hell and damn fire, and you know, he says, you know, have you ever burned your finger on a light or a match and put a piece of butter on it? Well, there's no butter in hell. So all of these, something like karma is so remarkable, because one of the ideas that was introduced is the idea of the magnification of karma. like a small seed can grow into a mighty tree, like a little snowball can cause an avalanche. Turning your attention to your daily life, to your thoughts, to your events, creates tremendous karmic impact. As a title of a book I saw, it said, Driving Your Karma, right? Actually, and of course I'm making the first mistake, it's karma, right? We don't use the long A, it's not ka, it's karma, it's a short A. But so a little attention to these things, to simply what we do in daily life. We're constantly creating all of the events. That you are here today is not that you suddenly found out about it or read a book. You made some link in the past. And this is the thing about the World Service. They are a group who have made a connection in the past and are reconnecting together. And some people, suddenly they work so well together. Everything goes so smooth. Some of them we have personality problems. But these are all the things for us to work out. So karma, a little attention to the events. And of course, you can have the most wonderful opportunity and then squander it. You can have a great life. You can have all the material things and yet turn away from the things that you will be carrying on from life to life to life.
What was Madame Blavatsky's vision when she founded the Theosophical Society?
The main thing, the society, it was not so much as an esoteric group like the Arcane School is. The Arcane School can be considered, in a way, the heart of the Theosophical movement. The Theosophical movement was the outer court, and even many other writers have considered this idea. There was no particular belief, nothing you had to read. But throughout its history, it has been mainly that it was to form a nucleus of universal brotherhood regardless of race, creed, caste, sex, color. This was a dynamic idea in the 19th century where even, for instance, if you were German, if you were Irish, if you were Italian, you were pretty well cut out. It was a very male Anglo-Saxon world. This idea of different groups, different people, even in India, people in different castes didn't get together. They didn't speak, they never integrated. The society was the first all-India movement where people from different backgrounds could meet on an equal footing. It had a tremendous impact on colonialism, which simply taught people that your own things were useless in this modern age. It was 19th century technology. But this idea of creating this nucleus, and as you know, toward the end of her life, she did try to form an esoteric school. It lasted quite shortly. Then she started her own inner group of 6 men and 6 women. But again, the things that were to beset the society constantly, of friction, of people not being able to get together or work out their problems, created all of these things. And she simply died of influenza in 1891. You know, she had been through many life-threatening illnesses. And then to suddenly die of influenza. And some of her own students felt that she was simply withdrawn because the movement itself had failed. It was just simply existing on a materialistic, esoteric level. And that Alice Bailey could come along, and as I say, in a few more years you'll be celebrating your own centenary. Perhaps you'll have me back by then. That, you know, a group to last a century and have so many good, vibrant people is a remarkable, remarkable thing. Let no one take that away from you. You are the dream and hope. When Alice Bailey came to New York, you know, the first thing she did was start a secret doctrine group. Before she published anything, they were all meeting and studying the secret doctrine. And that, from that little nucleus, you know, started this. She didn't start another organization, but she transformed that energy to another level, a deep interior level. So the work you're all doing is in a way, the fulfillment of Blavatsky's ideas.
Yes, you've alluded to the statements in the works of both Blavatsky and Bailey that the teachings are not complete and that there will be more. Would you be willing to share with us a little of your vision of what the next phase of the teaching might be like?
Good luck.
Any other questions? It's regardless of what my vision is, we must remember, and I think the idea that there are great teachers behind us is a most remarkable and wonderful thing. And the thing we must try to do is pick up what their vision is, not so much my vision or your vision, because only time will tell. Yes, we can all have great visions, but time, something to last the test of time. This is the secret of success. What my vision is, but the idea that suffering humanity, as you know, these great teachers are not only masters of wisdom, but they are masters of compassion. They exist for suffering humanity, for the outcast, for the person who's brutalized, for the person who is forgotten, for the person who is in need. They are there. They are that, like a bridge over troubled water, right? Like that beautiful rainbow bridge that we are building slowly by our efforts. That if we are in tune with their vision, it will come to us. You know, the great line about when the pupil is ready, the master appears. As I say, the great example is Alice Bailey. You know, when she was approached with this, it wasn't something, but she came to accept it and learn from it, you know, and literally gave her life for it.
I just want to make a comment about this question. Earlier, I was going to ask you, after you answered the question about Madame Blavatsky's vision, from your answer, I was going to ask what role her writing, the teaching that she provided in those books, had in the Theosophical Society proper. But I didn't get to ask the question, and here is this question about, you know, a new teaching, and it got me thinking that while you made the comment about the Arkan School, Alice Bailey's work being the heart, so to speak, of the Theosophical Society, it seems to me that if one considers a bridge between the Theosophical Society as this vision of brotherhood that Madame Blavatsky wanted to bring forward, and the work of training men and women of goodwill, you know, the mind,
Exactly.
through meditation, that oftentimes I've feel that our next step is to really realize our humanity, because it seems as human beings we think that we are all that we can be, but yet
Yes,
there is
our
so much,
potential
even
is so
without,
remarkable.
yes,
Yeah.
even without studying any of esoteric teaching, I often think that if one was to awaken to what it is to be a human being, that could be such a powerful event in
I would
one's
just make one
consciousness.
slight correction, not the Theosophical Society, but the Theosophical Movement. As you
Okay.
know, there are many different theosophical groups today. I think the great failure of the movement, or the groups, is that they couldn't work out. In 1893, there was a great world parliament of religions, and while the theosophists were telling the world how to live, they couldn't work out their own. And so it comes down to our daily lives. We can have all of these grand ideas, but when it comes out with our own interaction, and in a sense, J. Krishnamurti, who was going to be this great world teacher, and who, believe it or not, Alice Bailey did read and knew about, one of his comments was, what is the world problem? What is the world problem? Right? What is the world? It's you and I. What is the world problem? But it's how we interact. If we could just have a group like this, where people put aside their own needs and wishes to work for the good of the work. Remember, the work comes first. Then the world will be transformed. Yes, exterior things can be done, but the interior work also must not be neglected. So the Theosophical movement is a wide net that contains so many groups, so many people with even diametrically opposed views. But at the heart of it, as I say, what the group of world servers does is bring together a group of people who are committed. Years ago when I was in India, I spent a lot of time at the Theosophical Society headquarters in Adyar doing research in their archives all of Madame Blavatsky's papers are there. She put together all of these scrapbooks and things like that. And some of my friends kept saying, oh, you have to go hear this Swami. You have to go hear this Swami. Well, I wasn't really interested in hearing. I said I could be in New York and hear a Swami. I don't know. But eventually this gentleman did come to Madras, very old man with long, long beard. It was in the hinterlands of the city, and yet thousands of people came, imagine. And one of the things I remember him saying is, the heart should be full and the mind empty, but instead the mind is full and the heart empty, right? So it's not a question of just knowledge. It's funny that both the Theosophists and Alice Bailey use this particular, though the arcane school, it's meditation, service, and study. With the Theosophists, it's study, service, and meditation. And that change is really a great difference. It's just not reading an exterior study, because as the Mahatmas tell us, knowledge like wisdom needs time to be digested. If you just keep reading and reading, and you'll get that intellectual indigestion. Yeah. But to absorb it, to make it yours, is so important. And as I say, we have so many books already, we have so much teaching already, and yet the world is still in a great mess. What we really need is a group like this that puts aside all of these things and works on the most important thing, the transformation of consciousness. That is the thing the world needs now. As the song goes, that's the thing that there's just too little of, right? What the world needs now is love, sweet love.
You could say that the esoteric heart of the new group of world servers, as we discuss this group of world servers, consists of all the esoteric groups, no matter their tradition.
All like-minded souls. There is an inner organization as opposed to just the outer one that are connected by aims.
Yeah, subjectively. Yeah. But we had a discussion earlier, we were just noticing how much groups like the TS and other esoteric groups are coming closer together and cooperating more, and I think that must be a good sign.
Well, they have nobody left to cooperate with. They've dwindled down to such a small group. There's nobody else. Otherwise, you'll have 2 or 3 people in a room sitting together.
Well, so not throughout the world, hopefully.
But yes, this is one of the great things. During our own lifetime, we have seen so many barriers break down. We've seen the Berlin Wall break down, and that on the exterior plane is a symbol for what is happening on other levels. And all it takes is one righteous person to stand up and make that change. We look at the case in Burma with someone who had been imprisoned for 23 years, and now she's playing a part in the construction of that country. Our own president here, imagine, visited Burma, first American president to visit that country. But she had principles. We need principled people. Look around us in the world. Who are the ideals that people have to look up for? Sports people? Movie people? I mean, their lives are not idealistic. We really need those great ideals to be put before humanity to help lift up consciousness. And I keep saying this over and over. When we meet together, the power of a collected group of people, no barrier can withstand. This you'll find so much in the Tibetan teachings. This is really one of the key things, that nothing can withstand this great force.
Thank you, Michael.
Just as a point of information, I'd like to mention that for the past 15 years, the State University of New York Press and the Western esoteric traditions have been publishing numerous books on similar subjects, an example of change.
Yes, but they tend to be looking at it as something with... there's a wonderful picture by one of the Dutch masters called The Anatomy Lesson, while all of these burghers are standing around the corpse. And to them, it's not a living, breathing thing. They're dissecting a corpse. And so they only see, it's like saying, I'm going to look at the corpse and find where the chakras are. And since I don't find it, it doesn't exist. So in a sense, yes, they are paving the way. The interesting thing now, in Amsterdam, the University of Amsterdam, you can get a PhD and an MA in Western esotericism, as you can in the Sorbonne, as you can at the University of Exeter. But those people who are teaching, their students are not just people who are just distant from it, they're also practitioners. So slowly, this whole view is changing on an academic level, on an interior level, on so many, many levels.
You're undoubtedly familiar with the phrase about the mystery of electricity. And so the Lucis Trust has this project called the Electric Universe, the Electric Bridge. Do you know, can you comment about that in terms of Blavatsky's teachings?
Of course, electricity is existing on so many levels. As you know, this is one of Blavatsky's ideas. There's 7 levels on everything, 7 keys of looking at everything. There are 7 approaches to things. So this idea, what we consider electricity on the physical plane, of course, has different levels. It's the material part of Fohat, that thing, the thing that brings all things together, that binding unity. And of course, as she says, it's like Kundalini. It's that we have it interiorly, we have it exteriorly. It's a means of, in fact, transforming this whole new world. It exists on a universal level as atomic fission. You know, it's so many levels of it.
Anything else? No? We're done?
I just want to ask, so what came first, the theosophical movement and then the society? I just wanted to understand your...
It started right here in New York in 1875 with a group of people right on Astor Place. It's now Washington Irving High School. And some people were meeting in Blavatsky's rooms, and they were having a discussion like you, and they decided to form a society. As you know, the 19th century was very big about forming societies. But there was this giant spiritualist movement that Blavatsky actually came to try to raise them up from their just, you know, everything was just spirits of the dead. The American spiritualists did not believe in reincarnation at all. The idea was abhorrent to them because the spirits who communicated told them there's no such thing. But she came to them, tried to work with them, and you know, just like Alice Bailey came and tried to work with the Theosophists, they weren't that receptive, so she went on and tried to then find people who were receptive to the message. And from that little nucleus right here in New York, it grew to this tremendous movement. And it's true, of course, Alice Bailey working in Crotona, in that Theosophical Center, that of course she did meet Foster Bailey. You know the story of how they got married. I think some of you know it. They were out in a field and he proposed to her, and there was a horse in the field, and she said if the horse nodded, it would be yes. And he must have had one long moment, and the horse did nod, and there it is. And they were connected. But you know, his own work, who would have thought himself also? You know, the masters find us. You know, we really don't find them. They find the right people. To have found her, to have found him, to have found Mary Bailey afterwards, to keep, who have kept that link unbroken. As you know, Blavatsky's last words were, keep the link unbroken. And this is really all we have to do, is to keep that interior link unbroken. And hopefully pass it on to the next generation who come after us.
Well, thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.